So this is how I was just showing you the project. And so I'm just going to go through and start working on the same sorts of things that we've done in the past. So first off, the background layer is a bit of a problem. Remember, we don't really want to have that locked. We want to we'll just click on that lock, right? So I think in the last video, I actually deleted it and made a new layer. You can also just click on the lock and that just turns it into layer 0. I'm going to use my brush and let's talk about our colors real quick. So just like in the last project where we had light and dark, so we're gonna start the same way. We're just gonna pick kind of a light color and say okay, and then we'll pick our dark color and we'll kind of pick something like that. We'll say okay, and so basically dark and light. We'll just start there, and we'll work with dark and light. Um, might be nice to actually have. Let's open the tree version 2. So I have this as a. Is that a bad idea? Maybe that was a bad, oh, I see. I just see how it tabbed in there like that. That threw me off a little bit. I'm just going to keep this to the back here so that, or well, maybe it's not a bad idea. I'll tab it. Actually, it's not a bad idea. Let's tab it so we can look at that version right there. And I kind of want to have that as a little bit of reference so that I can come back to it. So if I start slowing down, I can just start picking up over here. But you can see that basically the layout, I really kind of like the layout, but I'll try and recreate what I did. Um, like I said, I'm not a great painter, and I don't expect you guys to be super great at this with the first try. Some of you are probably going to make really great paintings, and it's going to blow us all away. But those of you that are new to this, try to just be easy about it. Don't get too caught up in it. Let's start with kind of the darker color. I actually have kind of an odd brush here, so let me just, I'll talk about in a moment about these brushes, but I'm just going to grab a basic round brush. Let's make the hardness about there and make it a bit big, and basically I'm just going to darken up the background, and that's kind of how I started, with kind of basically a dark background, and that was step one. And if you recall, we were there were those different darks and lights that you could choose from, and I'm just going to kind of pick a palette that worked well for me, and that's kind of how I started. Was I had the dark, and then I kind of made a mid ground, and then I made the tree, and you can see that the background I ended up making it lighter in the end, but let's just start with dark. So what I started with was making a selection. And so last time we were working with these marquee selections that are the rectangular and elliptical. Let's move into a new selection type, and this is the lasso type. You'll see there's polygonal, lasso, and magnetic. And I'm mostly just going to stick with the lasso tool for this particular process. Okay. And I think you'll notice that a lot of people are doing this kind of work. All right, so I'm going to make a new layer, and we'll start by just kind of making this little hill here to begin with, and just kind of delineate sort of a midground and a foreground. So I'm just going to click and drag, and it just kind of makes a see how it go beyond, and it just kind of connects and makes kind of a shape like that. Try not to overthink it. Remember, if you remember, we can use our transform tools to really twist and maneuver this, and that's what he did in the last one. Is a lot of transform tools to get the shapes I was after. I do like how it kind of dips down right there, and I kind of want to exaggerate that, but let's see that. So I'm going to deselect again and just try that one more time. So I'm just going to click and drag and just kind of make that hill, and just notice when I go past, it just goes all the way over, and even though I'm outside the drawing, it just sort of, it can't go anywhere beyond that. It just sort of gets stuck. I'm going to grab my lighter color, get my brush, I'll just paint that And then I'll deselect. And now we'll make our tree. So let's kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's just name these so we don't lose track. So we'll call this back. Can't remember what I actually called this in the I think I called it mid hill or something because I have rocks too. So I'm gonna say mid hill, and then we'll call this tree. Okay. Now, obviously, as you saw, some people just painted these straight up, and they didn't even use separate layers, right? But I think the layers are helpful, and I do want you guys getting used to using layers. So I'm going to really encourage you to use layers in this process. But obviously, you don't necessarily have to. Now, I'm going to grab that lasso tool one more time. And remember, in terms of making a selection, it doesn't really matter what layer you're in to make a selection. You know, we can always pick the layer that we want to paint in afterwards. But I am making the layers first, so and then selecting them. But be careful again when you're using your layers, okay? So I'm just going to kind of draw out this tree shape, and I'm just looking over there, and you know, I am, you know, it's not exactly identical. Again, I'm doing a horizontal. This is a vertical. So I'm kind of making up what this looks like, and I'm not following it exactly. I'm just kind of going for it. You know, obviously, also my horizon. You know, let's not worry about it. Again, I can move this tree after, so I don't want to get too caught up in that. So I'm just gonna kind of take this thing and draw out. And this tool's a little bit funny in that, you know, you have to really kind of draw all the way around. You can't stop in the middle and then decide something else, right? You kind of have to draw the whole thing out like that. So if I were to sorry, I have it set up that way. If I were to say draw like this and then let go, do you see it kind of makes that, and then I draw again, and it just keeps wanting to let go of the selection each time you click. So you know, you have to kind of think about it a little bit as like you're drawing the outs of the whole entire outline. So again, just kind of draw up. I like that first one a lot anyway, and that's kind of a bummer I let it go. But I don't like that one at all. Just going to deselect that one and try it again. And again, don't get too caught up in it. You know, like I really like that first one I did. It's a bummer. Let's see if I can go back and get that first lasso. No. Oh, actually. Yeah, I like that tree. That looks good. Kind of like that a bit, but you know, it's a little bit narrow there. I thought it looked better than it did. All right, I'll make another one. So take your time, but don't take too much time on it. I kind of had to go back and rework it a lot. Just thinking of that root right there, and then kind of there's another root coming down there, and like that. Okay, looks good. I'm gonna leave it there. So now the only other thing now is that I only have two colors, so I'm just gonna go into one of these colors, and I'm gonna pick sort of a mid-tone. I'll go a little bit, I'm not gonna go to the dark side, I'm gonna go a bit to the lighter side, but not, you know, so slightly different. So this is my third tone. So this just gives me three tones to work with. Grab my brush, and I'm just gonna fill that in. And so there's my tree. Now, don't really have any branches, so I thought what I would do instead is just come back out, and then we'll talk about the tools for these a little bit. So there are some modifier controls for this, like Alt and Shift and stuff like that, but there's also these up here. And these are technically called Booleans, like, so this is add, subtract, and or this is and, not, or. And so some of you know that from algebra. some of you don't, but maybe sometimes the picture sort of makes sense a little bit. This one takes away, this one adds in, and this one takes the the ore of it, like it you know, what's left over, what coincides, or it's hard to say. I'm trying to think of algebra, it's throwing me off. So if you right now by default we have this one selected, which means each time we click and drag out we get a new selection. Okay, but if I have this one selected, it's kind of cool. So I can click and drag out kind of a branch like this. And now if I click and I drag again, I can get another branch, and it won't make another selection. You see that? It just sort of creates another shape. Let's kind of come off this way. And trees are kind of cool in that, you know, you can kind of this will eventually get filled in with leaves, but you can kind of it's nice to have a couple little dark shapes in there just to sort of fill in those areas where you know, there's that dark area right there, and there's little lines that you can kind of catch a little bit. I think it really adds a little bit if you do have a little bit of a line. You can also sort of start to think about, like, maybe there's wind or something pushing in one direction. That's why that tree sort of started to turn a bit. I'm not going to add too many of these in here. I can come back with a brush later. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go back to my brush again, and again, same color, just to fill that in. And you know, I could have done that all in one shot, of course. But it's kind of trying to reiterate the selection tool. So those are my three elements. So now I can go with my move tool now, and I can reposition the tree if I don't like where the tree is, right? So I can do that. I can take the mid hill and I can reposition the mid hill. I can go into my transform, right? Let's say in the last class we were doing a lot of scale and rotate, a little rotate. I think we did a little rotate, maybe we didn't. But this time, take a look at this one. This one's called warp, and this one's pretty powerful and really works well for this kind of thing. And warp's pretty cool because we can kind of grab and distort in a more unusual way. We can kind of grab, and I can kind of already know I like that look where it was getting a little pulled in this direction. So I'm kind of getting that more up and down on the sides, and I kind of like that orientation. I actually kind of feel like I like the tree where it is. So again, remember you have to accept or cancel. You know, if I could though, if I wasn't happy with the tree, I could come in and do Command T, or sorry, I don't think I've shown you the Command T yet. I'm just so used to doing that. Remember, Command T is right here. It's the free transform, which is basically transform, but just, you know, there's a key command for it. We could do a little bit of scale on there. Maybe it's a little bit big. I could make that smaller, or I can make it bigger. With the branches on there and our leaves, it's going to get a bit bigger. Kind of liked it a little bit offset. So, you know, centered is not like ideal. You know, there's the rule of thirds a little bit if you're familiar with layout and composition. You know, this is the time where you're really trying to figure out where do you want these things. And composition is really one of those words that we get thrown around a lot. But and there are some rules, but they aren't rules that you can't break. And you're trying to just sort of have a nice balance. There's what looks good to you. It's a very subjective sort of process when you're laying things out. But typically, if you center something, it can feel a little bit like it gets really, everything gets really solid and stable, and it can feel less dynamic. If you kind of push something a little bit over to the side a little bit, it just sort of adds a little bit of more dynamic look to things. You could look at it that way. I suppose you could say a lot of things there. Um, but this is the time that we're just kind of we got these basic shapes and we can kind of move them around, and that was sort of the whole idea of what people were talking about. I can, while I'm here, if I don't like the shape of the tree, I can kind of get into that warp a little bit, and I can kind of distort it a little bit. I can kind of try to exaggerate some of those bends in the tree a little. Um, you can see that in some ways it can kind of take what you painted, and those distortions can really kind of help in ways that you wouldn't think, right? Like, so be open to kind of playing around with these things, and just sit there and kind of move them around for a little while, and just notice that I'm kind of clicking on each one of the intersections of these things, and I can really distort this around a lot. And you don't see people talking about that in the speed paintings, but um, they're doing a lot of that. It's just going by fast, right? Um, when I look at this, I kind of, this is a really dynamic aspect of the tree right here. This looping right there. So I don't want to lose that, right? Like I really don't want to lose. I don't want that going into the hill. I want to really show that. So again, in terms of like when you're laying these things out, you want to kind of watch for those sorts of things. Like, did I just kind of lose the real awesome part of that tree? And if you did, try to get it back, right? Again, a lot of this is going to get covered with leaves, so I don't need to do too much. And I also want to come back and do some shading on that. I might do a little painting. It looks a little narrow right there. I might kind of mess around with that. But just this is the time to kind of play around with those things. So first, you're just kind of getting stuff out, and then you can really kind of use your tools and your transforms to bend and distort and mess around and really play with your shapes a little bit. So it's not that's where digital painting really changes from traditional painting, where we're doing all this kind of stuff afterwards. Okay. While we're on layout, I realized I after the video I forgot to mention one extra element that helps, and some of the speed painters are using. So I went back and a couple extra layers here, but um, the thing that a lot of people are doing is they're flipping their image so they can see it horizontally and different flipped. So let me show you where that is. It's in View, Flip Horizontal, and you'll hear them talk. Some of them talk anyway about, or just start working this way. But they're flipping their image so they can see what it looks like from both directions. And theoretically, it should look good flipped either direction. And so you'll see them just kind of flip for a while, maybe even paint or work, flipped, and then flip again and work and paint, and then flip back. And they're kind of flipping back and forth. And I just wanted to put that in this video. Make sure that you see that tool as you're working through the rest of the image. You might want to use that to help you with the layout and when you're painting for the rest of it. So just going to add that in there and we'll move on. So it looks pretty good. Let's move on. I'll do a little bit of rock, and I don't want to get too into it because you guys see the process, and then we'll talk about the brushes a little bit, and then I'll show you the adjustment layers, and we'll end it there. So with the rocks, again, you'll sort of see people doing different things with rocks, but really commonly the rocks are going to be selections, and I did something kind of did something like this. Not really, I'm looking at this rock and I don't really like what I just did there. Let me come. It's a little bit weird because it's so long and this is so short, so it's going to be a little bit harder to follow that image. But one thing I see is how this crack goes like that, and that's kind of, I'm using that sort of as a bit of a design element for the rocks. There's actually some bushes in there, so maybe later I'll add in some bushes, and I think that could really help a little bit. I don't know what that is. I'm kind of far away. It sort of looks like a formation of rock, but it kind of looks like a fallen tree, but I don't know. But that's a really unique shape there too. So that was how I kind of came up with those other shapes. But because of that crack, I'm just gonna take this and just kind of follow that shape and do something like that, and then follow and do something like that. Kind of missed right there. So, just notice I kind of want that corner there. But remember, that I'm still in my selection process. I'm still adding. I have moved from this singular selection type to add selection type. And so if I want to add to that, I can just click in here and just go around, and you see how it added into that selection. Pretty straightforward. So we'll make a new layer here. We'll call this for rock. And I'm saying that as kind of foreground rocks. Okay. Now, really, typically, I want that maybe below the trees, and the order is important, so you can play around with that. Just gonna grab my brush. Now I have this lighter gray, so I'll just stick with that lighter gray for right now and just kind of paint that out. And we'll just say Command D, and we'll just set that out, right? Now remember, with the we can turn on that same lock clear pixels if we want, and we can always come back with a darker color and play around with our flow. And it's a little hard to remember. I was talking about this. We could do a little bit of the some of the coloring like we did with the sphere. Can come back with a lighter color. Now, this sort of brings me into another tool that is useful for painters. And now we're going to kind of get into paint brushing and brushes and a little bit of selecting color and selecting different brushes. So I'm just going to draw your attention to this tool, but I'm going to show you a different way of utilizing it. This is called the eyedropper. And the eyedropper allows you to select different colors out of your image. Okay. Now you can use this tool and click between the brush and the tool if this really freaks you out. But also, if you're in the paintbrush already, just notice what happens. I'm going to press down the Option key on the Apple control. Apple, they call that the Alt or Option, but let's just call it the Option key. It's between Control and Command. And I believe on a PC it's in the same place. You don't have the Command key though. I think you call it something else. No, it's Control, Windows, Alt. But it's the Alt key for the PC and Option for Apple. But notice what happens. If I click down and hold, I get this with the Alt key. So this is on my keyboard. I'm just holding that. I'm not doing anything with my mouse. But now I'm going to click down with my left mouse. And just notice what happens. Now as I drag, I'm clicking and holding. Now I'm holding the Alt key and I have my left mouse button clicked. And just notice as I drag around that that circle sort of shows a different color as I go over it. So the bottom part of the circle shows the color I originally started from, and the top part of that circle is showing me the color I'm currently on. So what's interesting is when you go over these areas that are kind of blended, and just notice how it goes from light to dark. And actually right here I have a perfect gradation from this color gray to almost my total dark color. Do you see that? It's pretty awesome. But I'm going to go even more. I'll go to this light color right here. This is my lightest color in the image. And I'll just take my brush, same settings, and I'll just brush the tops like we were doing with our sphere, right? Just messing around, you know, it's cool. Now it's kind of dropping off a little bit, so I'm just gonna grab my Alt key and hold down, and see now I can go from my lightest color to my darkest color, and I actually have now the ability to really pick any of those gradations at all at this point, and I'm going to take advantage of that. So we're really kind of quickly leaving the whole three-tone quality, but we have all the tones between the two that we set now. So I'm just going to pick somewhere in there, and I'll just blush over there and just kind of get that darker because it's losing itself in the light there. Looks good. So I'm just going to do that one more time. I'll make one more layer, and I'm going to call this Mid Rocks. And I'm going to make some more selections. And these are kind of these areas here that were those lines, and I'm just going to kind of select out and just be more linear in my selection. And don't really know what we're seeing over there, but just going to kind of go with it. And you can see I'm kind of hitting the four rocks a little bit. That's all right. Going to kind of use my layer stack to help hide these. Also kind of going over my branches or my roots a little bit, and you know, you just want to kind of try to go a little bit beyond so that you don't look like you're kind of trying to stop some things. Do not like that one. Oops. Let's take that now. Let's do that like that. Maybe looks good. Looks good. Just some lines, some difference, right? And so now we'll come back. I'm going to grab my darker color here. So I'm using just switching between my light and dark again. Grab my brush. And my flow's pretty low, so I'm just going to crank that back up again just so I can get some color there. Looks good. So the big thing there are really, let's move that. Let's put that mid behind the four rocks like that, so they're kind of hidden a little bit. That looks better. The thing that we want to kind of pay attention there is that the selections, I probably should have finished that mid-rock selection process first, and then go into the picking out colors. But don't forget the important thing there was kind of going back over, holding Alt or Option on the Mac and left click dragging and picking out different tones off these grays. Okay. So a little bit about brushes. Let's close this history so we're not looking at that. It's been in the way. If you look at your brush icon, so I have my brush selected. Come up here, and we talked about the flow and the opacity, and we clicked on this box, and we've been changing our sizes and stuff. And you know, I kind of prefer the right click and the dragging, or not right click. That's PC, but whatever. If you're on a PC, but the Control and the Alt and the dragging on the Apple, you know, but keep that in mind, you know. But notice this little folder. If I click on that, this little window opens. See that? This little window opened right here. It's called Brush Settings. It's also right here. If you notice, brushes and brush settings, and that'll open here. If I I can even close this tab group so that you can see it sort of show up again. So I'm going to click on this little folder, and it's a good way to get to it. You can also go to that window, but if I click on that, you see it opens up this brushes. And there's quite a bit here, and we'll probably just do a couple settings, and then one more time I'll go over this a little bit more, and we'll actually save some brushes. But I really want you guys to focus on painting right now. But I do want you to have a little more control, and some of you maybe have already worked with these a little bit. There's two tabs here. There's brushes, and this lets you pick out some brushes, and you may not have all the same ones that I have here. I think I've loaded a couple extra brushes here. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about how actually having too many brushes is a bit of a problem. So I'm just going to work on really two brushes. I'm going to have a kind of a dry brush and the regular brush we've been working with, just the round brush. But notice that these settings are here. But if we go back to the brush settings, and this is your default thing, notice that I also have these available here in this little window, and it's a little smaller, and you can't really see it as well. But I don't need to go to brushes to pick something. I can just do it here, and so I'm just going to stick in this window. So if you find yourself accidentally clicking on that, just go back to brush settings. So you can see the obvious things is that you have the brush size, and you can do that. And we have our hardness, and you kind of used to seeing those ones. What is really new and probably I think underestimated is this third slider right here, which is called spacing, and this is a really important part of brush tools, and you really want to learn this. And even on iPads and even the most, well, let's not say the most simple brush tools. A lot of those tools in iPads have these same settings, and you'll see that Photoshop, I think, has the most robust brush setup you can tool setup you can have. But almost all of them have a spacing, and if I drag that spacing, you can see that it kind of makes the round brush is actually a circle. And it feels like a solid brush because there's so many circles, and the spacing of them is so close together that it actually feels like a straight up line. Let's I'm on mid rocks right now. I'll just paint right now. You see, and it looks like a solid line. I'll undo that. If I put my spacing up though, what you'll notice is that the brush is actually a sequence of circles. See that? That's with my spacing way out. Okay, so I'm just clicking and dragging, and it looks like I'm just making a bunch of dots, but I'm really, it's the same brush. If I bring it all the way in, I get a really smooth brush. If I bring it way out, I get these dots. Now, obviously, with a round brush, it's, well, you might want to make a bunch of dots, I don't know, at some point, and so that might be a way to go about it. And you'll see that, like, using this is really powerful, and it's how we get better looks out of the brushes. Okay, so playing around with spacing is the first new element I really want you to think about, and this is the main tuner for most brush sets that you pick out. And I said tuner, like as in tune, like tuning, like a radio station. So you probably don't do that very often anymore, but tuning a guitar. So something that's out of tune, this is your final sort of like real, like, how do I really get this thing exactly the way I want? And this is like often one of the last portions that you'll kind of work with. So for instance, let me show you the difference. Put this way up, and this right here is these are the dry. If you hold on this, you'll see it says chalk. This is basically the same brush but different pixel sizes. It's really kind of silly. You could just literally just have one of these and it'd be fine. 44, 60. I'll just pick the 61 because I kind of want a large brush. And just notice what happened is that when I clicked on that, it actually picked a spacing, which is 6%. And if I click and I paint with this, you'll see that it just looks like a line with a fuzzy edge, right? But let me change that spacing out a little bit and watch what happens if I can get that out a little bit. See how you can kind of see a little bit of a, let me make it even bigger. Let me make that brush bigger and you can see what I'm talking about. See how you can see between the brush a little more. Let me bring that spacing back down where it was. See how the center of it gets solid. I'm noticing that probably you don't have the shape dynamics turned on. Let me just turn that off for a second so you can see. Yours is probably acting more like this. Okay. I'm going to show you that shape dynamics thing in just a moment. Let me increase that spacing again. You can see that. And you know that kind of makes sense. Like maybe I want to kind of get on this this rock here. Let me do that, and let me get on this four rocks for a second. Maybe I kind of want to make lines like that, right? Okay, and that brush sort of supports that. Okay. So the spacing really gives a good look. Now the other thing you'll notice is that, okay, the straightness of this brush is a problem for me because I'm not really trying to make those straight lines right now. I kind of want a brush that's a little more random. I want to get kind of a dotty, loose look. So I don't really like this brush the way it's set up. So again, first thing we're talking about right now is the spacing. Okay, you know about size, okay, and you know about softness, but just notice with this brush, there's no softness or hardness. Just quickly notice that. But let's take a look at this one. This is called Shape Dynamics. And what you want to pay attention to is if you click on the word, it's going to show you the controls. And then people tend to not notice that this brush tip shape is where you started. Okay, so it doesn't have a checkbox. So this throws people off. They think it's like a heading for this list, and it's not actually a button. So if I click back on that brush tip shape, this is where we started. And this always this sets up the size, the spacing, the roundness, what brush you're using. Then you have these extra little bits here that really help with how that brush is actually going to work. And you can see that when I turn Shape Dynamics on, you can see that the brush sort of started to rotate. Let me turn that back off again. And you can see that they're back into that straight format. Let me show you what that is. But watch what happens though. There's a little bit, I want you to notice that if I click on the checkboard, on this check, it's going to check it. And you'll notice that this will rotate. And yours may not do that because you don't have any settings yet, maybe on your Shape Dynamics. I don't know what you have there. But if I click on that, most likely you see it getting narrower on the end and fatter and then narrower again. Probably, I think you probably see that by default. But notice that this window didn't change. So I still have my spacing. The difference is that I'm not clicking on the words. And you want to notice that if you click on the word is one thing, and if you click on the checkbox, it's another. So if I click on the word, it actually changes the window. And I can actually see the settings of Shape Dynamics. But it also checked it. I can uncheck it, and I can still see the window, but it's no longer active. Check it, it's active. Unchecked, not active, but I'm still looking at Shape Dynamics. Okay, brush tip shape, Shape Dynamics. Now I'll just click on scattering so you can see it. See how now I'm seeing scattering, and it check that. Texture, you know, I'm seeing texture now, and it checked it. So I don't want these two on. I'm just going to work with Shape Dynamics, and we'll start here. And what you're probably not seeing is this angle jitter, so let me just bring this angle jitter over. And what I'm going to just talk about just now is just only angle jitter. And some of you that are using pens and stuff, this is really awesome. You can see it's got pen pressures actually set to size right now, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. And I don't actually use it. I'm not using a pen, I'm using a mouse. But I'm just going to turn this angle jitter up, and you'll see that it doesn't really matter. At a certain point, if you go 100%, it's really just go up to a certain degree, and then maybe like halfway about roughly, and that just puts a bit of a it means that as each shape or each dot comes out, it'll take on a different rotation, and you'll see that this is a little more advantageous for what I'm after, because I kind of want to have a more random shape. Make that brush a little bit bigger. Let me look at my spacing. Looks okay. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. If I bring my spacing way out, I think I have my spacing a little bit wide there. So just notice that it's just not coming out very fast, and so the randomness is a little hard to catch. I'm going to bring this, that's what I'm talking about tuning. You kind of have to play the spacing afterwards once you pick something and just get the look you're after. And that's kind of what I'm after, but you can see that it's just the brush is flowing really fast. So if I turn my flow down, you see I can kind of get a nice kind of atmospheric look if I want. And it's just kind of a nice, nice look, okay? So those are some settings. So that's just your first brush that I'm sort of like introducing you to. Now you're probably gonna click and use all these different brushes, and that's fine. Play around with it, have fun with it. You might even just want to make a layer, and just put it on the top and call it test brush. And then just mess around with all these and just do them. Maybe turn your flow back up so you can see it. This is that. It's like grass, but do you see how it's using all of the settings, the shape settings that we have, the shape dynamics? It's using the angle jitter. And so if I pick these stars, big. Kind of cool, right? I mean, you can kind of make some pretty great looking stuff here. It's a little bigger. It's pretty nice, right? Like, and if you play around with these, you'll find that you'll get some really great looks with these. And again, we're just using this grays and stuff with colors. It starts to really be cool. But you can get some nice atmospheric look this way. Might be a cool leaf pattern, quite frankly, looking at that, or it looks a lot like coral or something. That star burst is pretty neat. We can also build our own brushes, and like I said, next week I'm gonna actually just really focus on brushes almost entirely. I'm about to run out of battery, so let me just get my plug in real quick. So the play around with those brushes for a moment. Take a look at those, and battery. Hey, that was close. Okay. I'm going to turn that layer off because I don't want to mess with that anymore. So that's brushes. Another way you might want to do this is you can drag this off too if you want and put this to the side just like we've been doing. So you could do something like this, like move these up here, take your navigator, put your brush settings like that so they're always open and not in your way. And so you can see everything. It's kind of nice. And then you have this setting right here. Some people like to do that. Oops, did not mean to do that. Bummer. That was a bit of a mistake. Okay. So you might find this kind of cool to have this down here and to work with it. You have to play around with how you like that. Some people like having these things just sitting out like that. It's sometimes a bummer when it keeps covering all your stuff and you don't want that, but you want to keep working with your brush settings. You can see your navigator and see what's going on. So while I'm talking about the navigator, just keep an eye on that navigator as you work, and it may help you, may not, but the one thing is that what they talk about is that it's like standing far away from your image at the same time as being close to your image. And again, that's a thing that's unique to digital imaging that you can't really do on a traditional painting. You'd actually have to walk away from your painting and then walk closer. In this case, you can have your navigator, and we can even make that a little bit smaller, and that if you make it even smaller, it sort of simulates walking farther away from your image. You can also use this to change the scale of the image you're actually looking at, but not as useful. Typically people want to be at 100%, and that's what you're actually painting. And you'll notice that most people that were talking weren't changing that very much. So let's go ahead and go to one more layer, and I'll take advantage of this brush I have, and I'll make some leaves. And that layer is selected. I'll just kind of click and drag out. It's a pretty cool brush. Let's bring that spacing down a little bit. Do something like that. I actually kind of really did like the, oops, didn't mean to do that. This brush a lot. And I think that's kind of what I started with to make this, and I think probably had a little bit of a kind of like what I did on the other image, a little bit more, but that's fine. And then I can switch around with different colors here and get the lighter colors. And I think what I did is, let's bring the flow down. It probably might help me if I have my flow down a little bit. I think I was just kind of, if you look at this side of the tree is a little bit lighter, and then it kind of gets darker on the back side, and I was doing something like this. Just kind of clicking around and kind of messing with it a little. And then I actually did use the eraser, and I know I talked about not using the eraser, but the eraser is not a bad tool. It's fine, and you can see that my eraser is using the same brush. It's a dry erase brush, so by default your eraser will be a circle, but I'm using just the same brush and pretty much the same settings. If you see, I have an angle jitter, and my spacing is kind of high. And I think what I did is I just kind of went through and just, because I want to see some of those branches there, I just kind of took some of the leaves out. And then I kind of came back with my brush and back with my darker colors. Maybe get even a darker color. So remember, I can hold Alt and I can click and I can grab even a darker color. This would help to have like the lighter background might help a little bit. And then I'm going to just take my eraser and just kind of my flow way down on the eraser. So remember, the eraser works just like a brush. Just going to kind of come back through, just kind of grab the outsides of the tree. You see how it kind of makes a nice like patterning for the outsides a little bit. Come back with my lighter color on the brush. Just kind of that brush a little bit smaller and then kind of beef up. It's like that. Play around with it a little bit. You can see I'm kind of moving around with the brush, and I'm taking advantage of the eraser this time. Okay, so using the eraser, same brush, exact same dry chalk, basically just the same as a paintbrush, but the reverse, right? So it's taking away, taking out, and that's kind of a cool thing to be able to do. Now, obviously, in the other image, I got a little bit into, doing a little bit of shading on the tree and stuff like that, and I did a little bit of shading on the foreground, and I would do that with just what other people are doing, and just you'll follow along with that. Is they often are making selections like this and using these extra selections to then kind of create maybe darker regions on these rock bits. Maybe something like this. That's those 4 rocks, and just take in the brush and come with this darker color. Now that I have this more randomized brush, you can see that. Let's come back with a little less flow on that. And kind of add in a little bit of texture this way, and I'm not getting the best brush for this, but that's fine. Deselect, and that's how they've kind of gotten those darker looks. Kind of feel like now that that this is all kind of laid out, let's take a look at the adjustments, and then we'll end it here. So the adjustments are kind of interesting, and let's just throw away that type brush so you don't get caught up in that. So let's click on the background, and let's start there. This is adjustments. There's a couple places to grab them, but they're right here for you default. And the one, we'll just stick with this one, just this one to start with, and it's really powerful. It's hue saturation. I'll click on that. Brings up the dialog box, and you see it drops right down above the background. And this might throw a couple of you off, but let's see how you do with it. The main thing to pay attention to here is that you really want to make sure you click on this. This is going to make sure that it only affects the layer directly below it. And on all of the ones that I made so far, we're using this. And so you'll want to click that for each one of these. Technically, it doesn't matter for the background because it's the only one. But the other thing to pay attention to is that currently, right now, I can only darken or lighten, and it doesn't really matter with the saturation or the color because it's just a gray color, right? But if you notice, there's a little colorize button right here, and if we check that, we can add color. So right now it's currently on the red portion, and if I kind of go, let's saturate that, and we'll bring it up a little bit lighter, and you can see you can actually just pick any color. Usually sky is a cyan, which is between green and blue. Maybe desaturate that, maybe kind of lighten it a little, and I think that was kind of what I did. And obviously it's a much more cerulean blue, or I don't know what that color blue is. And you see, it'll be a little hard for me to grab that color quite as yet, so I'm just going to stick kind of with a more cyanish color, which often is a little bit green, which people aren't as aware of in the sky. But I'll just kind of go up around there. And I think what you'll find with, again, with these kinds of things right now, it's like you want to kind of stay closer to the grays. You just want a hint of color, and I'm not going to really saturate things too much right now. I want to sort of keep them sort of more in the gray tones. The grayer tones will work better right now. So that's my background. So again, that started off like that. Now it's like that. I'm going to go to my mid hill. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to click on that hue saturation. I'm going to isolate it so it's only affecting the back hill. Let's just sort of go kind of brownish, colorize it, kind of go into the darker region. Don't want to be in the reds. I want to kind of get sort of here, maybe kind of darker, maybe. Play around with that later if we want. I'm not going to overthink it right now. Go to my mid rocks, same thing, adjustments. We'll do another adjustment layer. We'll make it work only on the bottom one. You'll notice that if you don't check this and you it'll do everything. See how it's affecting everything below it. So it's doing all the layers we just kind of worked on, and it's sort of affecting everything. It's not doing the tree or the four rocks because they are they're above it, right? So if I check this, and then it only goes to the bottom one, or the one right directly below it. So this little arrow is again that same idea. So it's only going to work with the mid rocks. I don't actually want to do too much to the mid rocks, but maybe I'll kind of maybe look at the blues. Kind of do some like complementary coloring a little there. Four rocks again, same thing, adjustments. Click on that, that. Go that lighter tannish. And then I'll go to my tree and do the same thing, adjustments. Colorize it, put it only on the bottom. I think it's worth making this one a little bit darker. This is kind of in the brownish range. Looks fine. You know, I want to highlight and stuff on that, and again, it's not really important. It's just the sketch, right? And then the leaves, we'll just do one more adjustment. And we'll do this one only. We'll colorize it. And actually looks kind of cool, right? I think probably a magenta would look kind of neat too. It doesn't have to be green necessarily, right? But if I want to stick to that green tone, it's kind of warm green, something like that. Again, all these are available. If I click on, say, I want to do the background again, if I click on the background's color, you can see I can still continue to mess with that. If I want to mess with the tree's color, I can click on the one above that and play around with it and dial it in. And I can keep messing with those as I want. Keep your eye on the navigator as you do that. It's a good way to kind of again get a look at what it's going to look like. And those are the main tools, right? Those are the things that we're working on. So again, it's just about control and sort of using some of the techniques you used with the sphere and sort of applying them to more of an image now. Also keep in mind, those of you that aren't really like painters don't stress on it. You can see this is pretty simple. It's not really great. The selections help for making shapes. Don't forget that if you don't like a shape, use the transform and really get into that warp and mess around with these things. You can really get some pretty great looking effect out of these things by just really, oftentimes it feels like, man, I didn't really draw that very well, but then you kind of can mess with these and you can get some pretty great looks out of these, and just by distorting them a little, maybe go in and do a little bit of scale. Not sure I really like what I'm doing here, but you can really get some greatly move this around. You pick different spots. You can do something like that maybe, and again, keep looking at your navigator as you do that to see if you like the changes you're making. You know, I feel like these four rocks are losing some of the tonality. Like I'm not really feeling like I'm seeing it. So maybe go in there, maybe darken that up a little bit. Like that shows that that a little bit more. So just play around with it a little bit, and that's the point for this particular project, is to kind of play with them. Don't get too caught up in the detail yet. Get everything laid out the way you want, and then once you feel good about it, you feel like, okay, that's where I want this. Then you can come back and really tweak it, and that'll be the next week over. We'll start to really refine this image and see if we can get even a better look. So good luck. Take your time, and hope this helps out. So I'm going to end it here.